I actually I had a question I wanted to ask you guys. Do you think we were in our heads less when we were kids because we were riding our bikes? Ontology was more present. Something is what it is, and you learn to react to it. And we become more in our heads today, especially. And if that contributes to a lot of the bull going on in terms of people not being able to talk, not being able to figure out their problems, not being able to do the right thing or the stuff they should do. It's kind of like almost like we have a mental retreat. Is that too vague?
I think it's
No.
the exact opposite. I think we were too much in our heads when we were kids because you were ignorant to all of this stuff and you could just enjoy life as it was.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. You weren't in your head. You were just
Because
accepting
I
things.
thought you said you were in your head. Okay.
I mean, we were less in our heads when we were kids. Yeah, I'm saying we're more in our heads as we get older. That tends to happen, but I think it's even more so now. People get in their heads at a younger and younger age now, so they don't get to experience reality. Like how they say you're in your own solipsistic world, your own needs in your own head up till the age of 3 or 5 or somewhere around there, around the age of 3, and that's when you start to notice your own reflection. You start to notice that if you steal Timmy's toys, Timmy starts to cry. So you notice other people in relation to you. So other things exist and the way you react to them. And then you start to get outside your own head and you react with the world and people around you. Do you think we are more and more in our heads and staying in our heads and having less and less of that reaction to the world and, the fairness of reacting to the world?
I'll let
Well-
Coffin handle this one.
Yeah, I'll answer. I think that's a great question, Human, and I've never really thought about it, but I absolutely believe that people today are spending more time in their heads. When I don't know if it's universally true, but I really don't think children are very introspective. I think maybe sometime around the time you hit puberty and you become aware of the opposites, you're probably a lot more self-conscious, a lot more introspective. You're trying to sort things through in your head. But I think absolutely, I think it's just part of being an adult as well. But in today's world, if you're asking in the context of the world we live in now, I think it's also true that children are probably in their heads a lot earlier than when I was young and you were young.
Well, they always start off in their heads. I'm just kind of positing that we stay in our heads now all the time. The parents keep their kids in, don't go out and ride your bike. They're worried they're going to get hurt or abducted or whatever. And so everything is about keeping you in a cage, in the house, on your tablet, on your screen. It's kind of, there's a lot of safety wrapped around it. So, I just thought it was an interesting thing that maybe contributed to all the crap that people are struggling with.
I
Yeah,
think it is because you pointed out a number of things that I haven't really went through the transition with. Like you mentioned going out with your bike, scraping your knee, and all of those things. And while I still have some overlap with things like that. I've never really had a pure transition from one to the other because I've had a computer and an internet connection from a very young age in the house. So for me, things haven't really changed that much over the years, just in terms of education, job. But for how my active day-to-day is, there wasn't a lot of change there.
Yeah, that's something interesting too, because your world doesn't suddenly change where you want it to. So you don't go from being coddled by your mother and staying inside and very close to her, and then all of a sudden you get jolted and want to get jolted and ride your bike and go out into the sunshine and, physically get fit and explore, develop your imagination, things like that. And I was just thinking, maybe that's why also, because I explored a lot. I was on my bike. I built tree forts. I used my imagination a lot. And I wonder sometimes if that contributed to me because I got out there and found mundane life really, really exciting and threw my imagination into mundane life. Like, I'd ride my bike, but I'd pretend I was on a motorcycle, or, I'd build a tree fort and come up with some fantasy movie in my head I was playing. So you made everyday life interesting and exciting, and you played with it and you tinkered with it and you tied knots. And, you live these narratives, and you had your friends, real people in front of you, three-dimensional people that you'd be interacting with. And I don't really see any of that anymore. And so, like, you kind of stay in that infantile state all the time. You just grow up, you get taller, and then all of a sudden you start driving a car and going to work.
Yeah, and kind of to carry it out a little further, human, think about today's world and what we're doing to children. I think we're actually creating a lot of neurotic kids because, we tell them about, attention deficit disorder and Asperger's and all of these psychological ailments that people seem to fixate on nowadays. I was an adult. I had no idea what attention deficit disorder or Asperger's or being on the spectrum. All of this stuff now that people seem to be obsessed with. What was, I mean, it was not a part of any of our existence back then. So I think we're kind of forcing kids. Once you tell a kid there's something wrong with them, and you're sending them off to a doctor or a counselor in school or putting them on medication. I'm not saying that these conditions don't actually exist, but I do question whether or not they're as widespread as we've, represented them in the world today. And just think what that does to a kid's mind as he's growing up and developing.
Mm.
You tell a kid from the time he's 6 or 7 years old that there's something wrong with him. Doesn't that seem like it would tend to kind of force him back into his own head?
Yeah, but also, like, I want to touch on what Karu said. I think with you and I, Boffin, we can remember stages in our lives where we went from this season of infancy to adolescence, then to adulthood, then to living on your own, then to, like, there were kind of the seasonal aspect of life,
Yep.
which also used to kind of be confirmed by your elders. They would tell you, you've got to grow up now, or, time to move out of home, or you're this age, you should really be thinking about X, Y, and Z. But there's none of that.
Yep.
It's just this one life now where no one really has any precedence. And what Karu said, his life hasn't really changed at all. So sort of how he spends his time or what he's into, yeah, he's grown in a certain way, but then in a lot of ways, like maybe the acceptance of kind of those seasons and changes in life, like he's not familiar with. And I wonder what are your thoughts, Karu, in terms of you observing, because I kind of see you in the middle. You can relate to people who are sort of in this current, like, modern generation, but you can also relate to older guys and sort of like have conversations with us. Where have you thought sometimes that the problems you might have are either with this side or that side, or because, say, Boffin or Human, they never got to experience this, they don't seem to have this issue with this thing I'm having, and I wonder if it's because of how I've grown up or the environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but in my particular case, it's a bit weird to talk about it because I was always the odd one out, even when I was in primary school, high school, everywhere. I was kind of the oddball in a sense because I was either the older one in the room or the younger one in the room. At least where I grew up, all of the so-called quote-unquote kids were high school age, or they were getting ready to go to high school. So I was the I was kind of the youngest of the group, and you can't really relate to them, but you learn to adapt and to kind of think pretty differently for your age. And then when you go to school, you can't really form proper, not proper bonds, but you kind of have a different opinion in regards to how the kids your age think. And obviously, you start valuing different things. Just think about going into getting into an art club and everybody's into art, and then you go to primary school and everybody's talking about soccer. You can't really relate to those kids anymore because you already have a different interest in mind, and you can't you can't interact with them on that level. And to me, it's weird because I also had the opportunity to have a computer at a very young age. I got one when I was in first grade. So from that point on, my will to interact and go out and play with people, or in this case, they were way younger kids than I was, really plummeted. And I kind of gravitated towards the older groups in general, both with topics of discussion, interest, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I may not have been into the whole rigmarole that I'm interested in, but I definitely had my niches where I would perform and I would even impress the older guys, and to me that was way more important than having somebody my age view me as an equal or things like that. But when it comes to what you mentioned, differences in way of acting or problem solving, I was lucky enough to where I was, at least I think I was socialized well enough to where I can pretty much handle everybody from the older generation and people from the younger ones, because like it or not, I had to have them around. So I'm kind of in a good spot. The lack of relatability that we have, I think, is mostly related to how much time I did spend online compared to somebody like you or like Poppin, and the way I interacted with the online environment. And you can see this when kind of the older guys show up in the room, and you talk about certain topics or websites you visit, or things that you look at online, and they just either don't find it acceptable, relatable, or they find it shocking, and to me it's just par for the course. I think that's where the differences lie.
Yeah, I've also noticed that even between you and I, sometimes where it gets lost in translation, whereas someone who's younger gets the subtext and gets the lingo and the reference, and it needs to be kind of literally explained to me sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Situations like that, you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes it needs to be explained, and I can kind of walk the boundary between both of them. But as I was telling Boffin the other day, depending on how young the person that I'm interacting with it is, you just don't you just don't even understand the language. You don't understand the humor. You don't understand anything. I was in a room a while back. I think it was a couple of months ago with I don't know, Zoomer. I don't even know what the younger generation is called anymore. And he was playing a couple of videos on Discord that he found funny, and I was just sitting there looking stone faced at the screen, and this guy was just laughing hysterically at something that I didn't even see the one shred of humor in the entire thing. It was just something that I couldn't relate to or appreciate.
Yeah, it kind of ties into, we've talked about the lack of conversation, right? But it's this kind of baseline that everyone, like, conversation used to be like the way people talk generally was kind of within the boundaries of, what the average person on the street could have a conversation around, and their vocabulary now. But now the vocabulary has been sort of it's kind of in these little islands and groups, and you talk, if the person within that group goes out to like a family barbecue, they're so used to talking within that bubble that you can tell they find it hard to talk just at a simple family gathering. And everyone starts to have their own language within the English language. And it's kind of very odd. I get the example that pops in my head, I've got this guy who emails me every week or every few days, and I have no idea what he's doing because his emails to me seem like memes or posts on Instagram. Like he's got a particular shtick. That's his thing. You know how you go on Instagram and someone might be posting a picture of a flower in a certain angle and it's only red flowers and it's just photo after photo of different red flowers. This guy's conversation is like that. He'll email me and every single email is something like man equals blah, blah, blah. Woman equals blah, blah, blah. And then every single email is like that. And I don't know what this conversation is. And it's literally 2 lines, every single email. And some of them I can interpret as, yeah, I kind of see the point, but I don't get it. Like, is this the way people are relating going through the world? Is this the way you're trying to solve the problems of the real world by having this really, really esoteric meme-like code that very few people can understand?
Well, think about the evolution of memes and the memes that were popular. Because if somebody says "Okay, Boomer," pretty much everyone can kind of relate to it and understand where it comes from, what it means, and so on and so forth. But then you have people that develop acronyms, take all the MGTOW lingo, and if you go outside and you try to use it in normal conversation, everybody's going to look at you like you're a weirdo and nobody knows what the hell you're talking about. I think it's similar to that. Like, how many people could relate to what he's saying in that email? Because it's not a conversation. It's closer to an equation by the way that you've described it. How many would be interested in trying to sit there and dissect what he said? And I think that's what's happening with all of our language. I mean, and it's natural that it is happening like that. Look at YouTube, look at TikTok. You're incentivized to only have 10-minute videos on TikTok. I forgot what the time limit is. So you need to pack as much information and as much punch as you can in a very short time span.
15 seconds to a minute, I think it is.
Yeah, so you're going to try to have as much information to give in a minute, and after that you feel like you're done.
Sometimes I found that a lot of the things that have cleared the way for a lot of frustrations I might have had, roadblocks in interacting with people or being able to fix something in my life, is when you can kind of come up with some big thing, an umbrella thing that's affecting everything. Because a lot of times online, people they'll micromanage and try and fix the little details. But if the big thing isn't fixed, then you aren't really going to fix the problem, that small problem in your life. And I think this staying in your own head and refusing to kind of play in the real world, which seems boring by comparison, or the language of the world is kind of really odd and dull, but at the same time getting passionate in your private little bubble, it's really important to you to fix your, I don't know, loneliness, frustration, lack of communication, all these kind of things, but it stems from this one thing of staying in this environment as opposed to fixing it in the environment that it's supposed to be fixed in.
Also think about the lack of accuracy if you're part of the younger generation and you're trying to allocate the maximum number of information in a minute. I saw something very interesting a while back. I forgot who mentioned it to me, but emotional wheels or something, that was the name. But in essence, they're just charts that give you a list of adjectives for the way you feel. So you say you hate something, but then you have a list of 10 other similar words that describe the same feeling, going from annoyed to rage to hatred and so on and so forth. And when you go through the list, you realize, well, you know what? I'm not exactly at the level of hate. I'm more annoyed or anything else on that list. But if you look at how conversations kind of flow nowadays, you don't have the in between. You pretty much have the the lowest of the low, you have the median, and then you have the extreme case. And everything in between kind of gets grayed out. You no longer have that density of information between everything else. So it's natural that people either gravitate to one extreme because it's just easy to grab that adjective. I think that's part of the discourse that we're having nowadays, and I don't think it's necessarily good.
I don't even think there's a. I think you're giving it a bit of credit there, where you gave it the three levels of like the medium, the extreme, and the kind of the lower end. I think it's either everyone's pushing for the extreme to get views and likes and clicks and be noticed, and everything else there's basically neutral and extreme, and those are the two opposing poles. And as you mentioned, like there's no discussion of the gray area, which usually it's where the problems are. It's where the confusion is. It's where you have conversations. It's where you work things out. It's where you discover. It's where you get stimulated by things you don't know, the gray area. And it's really the whatever area of nothing is what you already know and what you're comfortable with. And the extreme area is, like you mentioned, they're using that language where sometimes it's not even applicable. You know, like I literally died, or, you know, something's always the extreme where it's just mundane and no one wants to talk in the mundane. You can't just say, I had a discussion with my friend. It's, oh my God, you'll never believe what I said to Jane. It's like, and then you listen to them and they just had like a normal exchange. But the way they present and they want to shock you with their conversation every time, as though it needs to kind of be parallel to online media. It's like clickbaiting you into the delivery of what they're going to say. It's like, dude, just tell me you had a conversation.
Well, I'm guilty of this myself. I tend to use hate a lot as an adjective, and then you just use, I don't hate it that much, or I hate this a lot, or I really hate this thing. But the descriptor I'm using is the exact same in every instance. And it's really easy to misinterpret that, because when you say it, people already think of the extreme, and it may just be a mild annoyance for me, or it might not be anything of great importance, but just using that descriptor is enough to have faulty communications between parties.
What have you noticed, Boffin? What's one thing that you notice where you're in a different lane when you're talking to people much younger than you, and like compared to like teenage, early 20s to someone in their 30s to someone sort of more midlife and older?
This is going to be good because he's on the other server, and the stories he's telling me, oh boy.
I think we've kind of had this conversation in a different way in the past, Human. We talked about when we were young, we were kind of forced into the broad social order. We didn't have a choice. We had to deal with all of this stuff because it was out there. It was in our path. We had to interact with it. We had to figure it out. We had to work through it. But in, you know, the social superstructure that we've constructed now gives people a convenient way to self-select into very small specialized groups or fields of interest. So for instance, when we were young, I mean, what did we have the capability to hyper focus on? We were kind of out there in the broad mix of the social order, and we really couldn't hide away and obsess about anything in particular to the point where we lost the ability to have, you know, a broader connection to everyone else. So I think it's just kind of, again, it's kind of a product of the world we've constructed, because people have this option to hyper focus and isolate. And I think the phenomenon's always been there. I mean, if you think about academics, people in academia years ago it was always pretty easy to recognize them because they were kind of odd. you put them in a social setting with average people, and they were very uncomfortable because they lived that very hyper-focused life. They were, biologists, or they were a physicist, or whatever it was. And I think we've just democratized the ability of people to hyper-focus on stuff. So it really is kind of a widespread phenomenon. When I talk to younger people now, usually you'll find one or two or three things that they're really focused on, but when you try to draw them into more generalized conversation or discussion about something else, it's really kind of amazing how little they really know or understand.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just kind of thinking now, like back then, if you have someone who was focused on a particular profession or like a calling that they had or something that they were good at or something that they were an authority on, they had that. They could talk in that wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But they had the ability to adjust when they were at a barbecue, and everyone could form a baseline way of talking and relating. And yeah, if someone wanted to kind of color outside the circles and become more specialized or whatever, you could kind of talk one-on-one. But now I feel like you mentioned the university professors. You go to university and it's like everyone is kind of pushed to be woke. And so you can't tell if you're talking to a mathematics professor or a sociology professor. The baseline isn't normal, pedestrian, polite, respectable conversation that has to do with the realities of the world and give and take and fairness and ability and all that sort of more of a real conversation. It's all politically correct conversation. That's the baseline.
Yeah.
And really, it's very hard to kind of be specialized. Like, I understand that what you're saying, people are kind of specialized in how they talk, but combined with the censorship, I think everyone's kind of politically censored in the middle. You know how you listen to politicians on TV and they won't answer questions and they just keep circling the same kind of lexicon, and it's just boring and there's nothing interesting and there's nothing personal. I never get to know the politician's personality. The only time I do is when they're sarcastic and trying to make fun of a situation or appear to be likable. But there's never that kind of the human baseline, reality-based conversation where we can kind of let the guard down. It's really, really odd.
Yeah.
You could have just interchanged that with MGTOW and you would have had the exact same result.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is anymore, but a lot of people in the comments say a lot of the extreme parts of the Manosphere, and I'm not saying it's just corners of MGTOW, but again, it's so broad. It's like they start to resemble the people they were fighting against. So the girl power chicks, the extreme pockets of the Manosphere and stuff, they kind of they use the same tactics and they tend to start developing the same personalities because they're fighting each other on the same battlefield. So they've got the same skills and ways of doing things and combating each other. And then when you start to talk to them, you can't just have a balanced conversation. You're saying, like, I just want to talk about the reality of this. Say, for instance, you're talking about a male-female issue. Let's look at this in a fair human being point of view. Don't you think?
No. Men, women.
It's very much two sides. It's a religious conversation, not a ontological human conversation where, like, we might be talking about how, say, women are entitled and unfair. And then we might drop in, well, to be fair to women, blah, blah, blah. We'll kind of look at it as a fair discussion as well. And we'll try to talk about the subject we're having a problem with as broadly as we can. We'll allow ourselves to observe it, not just from our own selfish point of view, but maybe from another person's point of view, maybe from a neutral judge, a point of view like that, just so we can work out the problem we're discussing and the frustration we're having. But now it's like this siloed frustration where it's, no, our community, we protect our tribe, and any conversation that tries to intrude and tries to befriend us in You know, the every tribe that tries to come into our tribe of conversation, we defend it with spears and we kill any tribe trying to come into our. We won't invite any other tribe in conversationally, so we could lay our weapons down and try and work out differences and build a bigger tribe or befriend another tribe or work out how to share this land or whatever. Like, I'm talking primitively. Everyone's like in their little tribes and they're just defending their walls. I don't know if I'm necessarily looking for solutions. A while ago, the only solution I could come up with was just trying to have my own standards that I thought were fair and that would work in life. Like, you know, the way I could have better conversations with guys that would be fair, allow people to be their own, you know, individuals, but come to the campfire and civilly discuss something, agree to disagree. The agreeing to disagree has become a lost art, I find.
Yeah. Well, going back to what you said a few minutes ago, Human, about how, you know, we form these tribes and battle with the outsiders. Don't you think that's kind of a result of people hyper focusing, breaking off into these little subgroups, these, you know, highly specialized, semi-isolated groups that, you know, focus on a very narrow field of interest? I mean, it seems like that would be the natural result of becoming a part of that smaller community. You form these bonds and these mentalities that you're the insiders and everyone else are the outsiders.
Yeah, but it makes sense though. If wherever you spend your time comfortably, whatever your routines and hobbies are that you just naturally and easily go to without even trying. Say, for instance, the things in your life that you want to improve, like your health or you want to read more. It takes effort for it to become a habit that doesn't require you to kind of push a boulder uphill. But for most people, they'll just kind of roll downhill to whatever's comfortable, interesting, and habitual. So if whatever's comfortable, interesting, safe, and habitual is your group and your little safe, interesting, esoteric pocket of interest, you're always just going to naturally just fall into that because it's easy. You don't have to think about it.
Sure.
But I think very few people want, you know, they get to the point where, no, I'm repeating the me of 20 years ago and I'm still here. And I find like I'm the oldest guy now and these guys are talking as though they just discovered it. Me, as an older guy, I know all this stuff. I have to pretend to be as interested as they are in a newly discovered way. And you don't want to admit that you want to go further, but there's no one else to talk to, you know? Like you stay in a bubble where you have, like you find, you know how in life generally your friends start to pass away. You start going to more and more funerals. It's kind of like these guys, they stay in something comfortable and, you know, you like the topic, it's safe, you know everything about it, which makes it even more safe because you're an expert. So if you're the expert in a certain thing, you feel like the best warrior that can keep yourself safe and you got pride and everyone looks up to you, you got status. But after a while, if everyone around your age, your friends that you grew up with, in that bubble conversationally, if they've all died off or moved on, you're having to kind of manufacture an interest of safety around people you can't really stand shoulder to shoulder with. You're almost like the elder. You're almost like the coach of a sports team, but you're pretending to play, but you're not really.
Yeah.
And you don't realize your friends have moved on or passed away. You're one of the last Mohicans.
Well, that may be where the stereotype of the angry old man comes from. You know, like said, you get older, all of the people that you shared the world with and are familiar with die off, and you haven't made the effort to adapt to the changing environment and connect with younger people. So it's going to happen organically.
But going back to before where I mentioned people are in their heads and there's kind of just one big environment now, which is the social, online, digital environment. Yeah, there's a few different corners, but that's the baseline. What happens now as people get older? Do they just is the adaptation just moving to an older person environment on the internet?
I don't know. I think you have to maintain a balance with both the online world and the real world. I mean, speaking for myself, the online world has given me an opportunity to connect with people that I never would have connected with in the real world. You know, prior to the internet, I may have made some connections with people professionally, maybe a few socially, but it was very limited. You know, it was going to be limited to the group of people that I interacted with for some reason. So
Mm.
there's, you know, from my standpoint, there's a recognition that there's an incredible opportunity to participate in the online world, to meet guys like you and participate in these communities. But I also recognize that there's an equal value to maintaining connections and relationships in the real world. So I don't see it as an either or. I think you need to find a healthy balance.
Do you, like, I'm playing devil's advocate, and maybe Karu thinks differently, but I'm thinking if this is the way of the world and it's just kind of, it's not going to go back, do you really need to maintain as much of a balance? Like you need to go and get groceries, but even that, you'll probably start getting groceries delivered. But do you really need to maintain relationships out there, practically speaking, where you can get almost everything done and work from home and get things delivered, and just sort of stay in your own little shoebox? Do you really?
Well, it depends what you want and how honest you are with the things that are going on around you. I mean, depending on your life experience, you're going to realize that whether you like it or not, there are certain aspects of life that you just can't ignore. And to be completely frank, looking back on the days when your server was up and you had some of these younger guys or even the older guys posturing on your server about how independent and how well off they were, a lot of the times you would realize very quickly that they were actually very, very miserable people. And in a lot of cases, you can just notice this by how quickly they would jump at the opportunity of a relationship. In some cases, even after their divorce proceedings wouldn't even be over, and they were still in the rage phase, and immediately they would jump in a relationship just to vent. So, and if you look at just how life treats you in general, you can have the luxury or the ignorance to think that you can go through life without building any bridges with anyone. But the second you get sick, or the second you have some of your parents get an illness that really requires them to have proper help, that's when you realize that not having anybody to lean on, or people you can talk to, or somebody just to vent, not necessarily to help you in a physical manner, you'll quickly realize that being very isolated isn't probably the solution to having a good life. It's fine when you're young and you're healthy and you can do a lot of the things for yourself. And if you're lucky enough and have the financial power to organize your life in such a manner where the effects of a lot of things will be minimized, maybe a solution. But nothing beats being able to drink a beer with someone and call certain groups of people names and just have a lot of fun.
Yeah. At the same time, when people when they kind of wake up later and they go, oh, well, who's going to take care of me when I'm older? For me, I see it's like a desperate pretending to wake up to reality because you need to be taken care of.
This is one of the arguments that I don't like, because they assume that that's the only situation in which they would need assistance. I don't know how many of the guys that like to bring up that argument have ever been properly isolated. is because of the type of job that I have. Depending on the workload that I engage with, there are times of the year where I genuinely don't go out for 2, 3, 4 weeks. I just can't leave the apartment just because of the workload that I have. And when you finally go out, because you have everything delivered, as you mentioned earlier, and you can get your food and a lot of other things. But after you go out, you're going to find yourself doing a lot of weird things, like talking to a cashier for an hour and a half, or uh, trying to have more social contact than you normally would with certain people, and you'll find yourself to actually need to get things out of your system. And if you experience that a couple of times, you're quickly going to realize, yeah, this isn't how life is supposed to be, or this is not how humans are wired on a fundamental level. Yeah, you can deal with it. You can be in your own world for a while, but it it's like the guy that never went to a party and he goes for the first time, and he really enjoys it and he has a good time, and then he just wants to keep going over and over and over again. I view it as something similar to that. Yeah, maybe you're not going to have the time of your life, but it's still better than your miserable day to day. It just gives you a different perspective, and a lot of the times you're going to realize that what quote unquote normies do, they do it for a reason, and a lot of the times it's quite enjoyable.
Yeah, I actually notice it myself sometimes, where you're at a supermarket, and just out of nowhere, just a very quick 15-second conversation occurs spontaneously with the person packing your food, or the cashier, and it's actually genuine. It's not fake. It's not like the "How are you today?" and it's not robotic. You can actually tell they're a they're a gregarious person. They like talking. They're an outgoing and social person, and the way they're talking to you is kind of refreshing. And then I walk away thinking, I like that. That was very rare. I don't do that often. I have my head down. I'm in my own little world. I'll say my polite thank you and bye and whatever, but I don't actually just wake up and have cold water splashed on my face, and have a really nice conversation with someone. And I'm very aware of what happened and how I feel, and I kind of I'm aware of, like, I need to do that more. It's kind of like you never exercise one arm, and that shoulder never moves, and all of a sudden someone stimulates that shoulder, and then you've got full mobility, and it's like, that was really good. But until then, I was used to just using the other arm, and I was fine with it.
Yeah, it's exactly that type of revelation. I forgot where I read this thing. I forgot if it was Reddit or 4chan or wherever the hell, where a very a person that was very interested in anime started reading the classics, and suddenly he was just sat there saying, I've just been reading trash all of my entire life, because all of these works of art are way better than everything that I've wasted my time on. Like, I can't believe that the normal people were right. And then to me, it was just the funniest thing. Like, where do you think your shitty digestible content has been derived from?
Yeah, whether you knew it or not, they've been derived from somewhere, even if it's subconscious. And it's amazing how many people will, whether it's in music, or art or somewhere else, they'll think they came up with an original idea, and someone will point out something else that is almost identical, similar, and even better, and more skilled. And then you're like, oh, okay, this was done before. So it's not, no, it wasn't done before. Like, it was derived from this, whether you knew it or not. So what's your point of view, Boffins, related to what Karu said?
Well, I think, to the point of the balance between the virtual world and the real world, if I think it's naive to think that we can tilt heavily to the virtual world, the online world, and end up with a healthy population. To the example you were talking about a few minutes ago, human interacting with, the person who was stuffing your groceries in the bags, those types of spontaneous interactions, you have the ability to have them, and the person who was putting the groceries in the bags for you had that ability, and you both learned that skill somewhere. So I think those are the types of things that you have to learn in the real world. You can't. The online world is so filtered that you miss a lot in terms of social interaction when that's your only connection to the outside world. How do you learn to read facial expressions, body language, just very subtle things that are important to communications? And I think that lack of skills show when you start when you start talking to someone who's only interacted with the real world mainly, through virtual communications. There's so much about communication skills that you can't learn. It's a different set of skills, and you can become very adept at it. But I think there's a whole big chunk of that organic communication that's missing from your skill set, your vocabulary in terms of social interaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of, especially younger guys who have, communicated primarily in the virtual world, I think that's why there's so much anxiety about, starting relationships or communicating with people in general.
Well, it makes sense. If back in the day, it was just normal. Like you had to talk to people. You went to school. You had to talk with elders, teachers. You just needed to always talk with real people in real life. And now we can just interact and virtual online learning. And there's a lot of staying in a bubble and not really needing to kind of parry and thrust.
Yeah.
Between like a real person. Like I was just thinking of an analogy. Like I remember I used to enjoy, like I played basketball for a long time, and I used to enjoy training a lot more because it was with my own group of friends. And, I would practice my free throws and 3-pointers and, certain dribbling and things like that. But I really didn't enjoy the live game. And I think I'm just thinking about the analogy of the average person that spends all their time online talking about the same things in repetition. It's like the person practicing free throws and they never actually play a game against other people where they have to kind of read things and pass the ball and look at nuances and wait for someone to shoot before you have you have to react to people and the environment around you. But if you stay there and all you're doing is in a meditative state, just taking free throws and practicing the same movement over and over again, and you go in front of another person, it's kind of like you're doing the same movement and they're going, "What are you doing, man?"
Exactly.
Like you that movement is okay for 1 second of the interaction with human beings, but it's like someone, when you watch a movie and you see the real rewind and the person's like going, "Wah, wah, wah, wah." It's kind of like the person's stuck on rewind. And unless you can rewind with them and keep looping the conversation, you don't know how to you don't know how to interact with them.
Yeah, exactly. And your example of going to school, that's another interesting phenomenon to me too. You would think that just by the fact that kids are going to school, that there is indeed a degree of socialization that's taking place, but it's very structured. Less so than today than we were young, but it's still a structured environment. Well, think about when you and I got done with school and we were on our own time. Today, the kid can go home, log on to the internet and sit there for the next, 6 or 8 hours communicating in the virtual world. You and I had to communicate. We had to learn to communicate with real people, our friends, our buddies, our family, people in the neighborhood. So we were continuously learning these skills on how to interact in the real world, and we were learning the importance of the verbal cues. The old man across the street, and your ball went into his yard for the 100th time. He didn't have to open his mouth. He could stand there with his hands on his hips, with a scowl on his face, and you understood that old man was pissed off. Well, I mean, how do you learn those skills when you're learning social interactions online?
Yeah, you can't. Well, like today, I've got family members who work in the education system. They're teachers, and they're forever telling me just how bad it is, and how in Australia it's probably the number one profession that they're desperate for teachers, because no one wants to work with children today. It's very hard, and they tell me that they have to individually, like every kid in their class, like 90% of the kids has some kind of personality disorder and special learning disability, and so the teacher has to cater and warp their curriculum to accommodate not just the lowest bar, but every single student in a particular way. So each student has to sort of be micromanaged and adjust the teaching and curriculum to their particular thing. So it's kind of like, yeah, you don't have to calibrate yourself to a baseline of everyone else. Everyone's going to calibrate themselves to your particular, every person is the sun. You don't orbit the sun. Every single one of you is the sun.
Exactly. Now translate that into pair bonding.
Yeah.
When both the guy and the gal are the sun.
Yeah. You have to always be in my frame. No, you have to be in my frame.
Yep.
Why don't I get along with anyone?
Yeah. I mean, the art of compromise. I mean,
the art of reality.
Yeah. Think of it in terms of relationships, the importance of that give and take. And, listen to, I listen, I'm getting the male perspective in the MGTOW community, but, the feminists are the same way. I'm sure if you consumed a lot of their content, it's, you have to come into my frame. And that's it. So you're ending up with guys with the perspective that she has to come into my frame. The gals are saying that, the men have to come into their frame. And it's kind of like, well, where does that get you?
Well, I think women for a long time have always just wanted to feel good, and that is what is right to them. So the cliche of when a girl breaks up with a guy, she'll go to her friends, and like 3 of her friends will hug her and comfort her and say, you're 100% right. You're beautiful. You're a 10 out of 10. He's trash. It's not your fault. You deserve better. He was no good for you, right? It's just kind of, she's 100% right and he's completely wrong. And I think men have adopted that because of various factors, because the world is basically female socially now. All the strings are that way. The way you talk, the way you interact is all very female. There's no room for men to interact socially, honestly, like the way they used to. Women have and are and actually have ramped it up in a really stupid way that's even more unrealistic than our grandmothers. So if everyone is the sun and everyone's fantastic, no one learns anything. No one can have, as Kara and I have had, I think we did a talk titled Two-Way Streets, or I think we all did, where no one wants to have conversations about thinking of interactions as two-way streets. And everyone's fine with saying, well, my last relationship, it was a one-way street because I said nothing, I was neutral, and she steered everything, and I'm not going to be taken advantage of anymore. And so now, from now on, I'm going to be the one-way street where it's all my way, and she's going to follow everything I do. It's like, it's not an either or. If the way I relate to my hobbies is not an either or. I give to it, it gives back. I don't just sit there and expect my videos to be made. I make them, and if they if I feel rewarded from them, or if I get something back, or I meet people, I talk to people, there's something that comes back. That's the relationship. But if you're being used and someone used you and you're used to one-way streets all the time, yet you talk about fairness, yet you never want to practice the two-way street of fairness, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
I don't want to say blaming the environment, like we're talking about older generations and the newer ones, but at some point you've got to make a choice of what's right. There's a lot of people that just give up and say, oh, well, I can't do anything because this is the way of the world, this is women, this is nature, hypergamy, blah, 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 censorship, social media and everything. But at what point do you kind of say, yeah, but I can actually choose something. I can choose not to do this. I can choose to do this more because this is healthier. I can choose to go outside and touch grass a little bit more. I can limit my gaming or social media exposure or scrolling endlessly. Like I can try and do things because I know that would help. But the more your environment and everyone says, nah, man, you can't help anything. There's no free will. Women are always like this and men are always like this and society's always like this and the world's against you and you can never win. And the only thing you could do is make money and get jacked. If there's only a very simple approach to life, then your nuance of knowing how you can correct it kind of disappears. Yeah. And it gives you an excuse of not even trying to adjust a small knob in your life where it could make a big difference.
Yeah. Well, I thought the whole idea of the red pill mindset was to, at its essence was to accept reality as it was, as it is. You're aware, you understand how things really function. I thought that was the idea of the red pill, but I think what it's morphed into has become a lot more black pill. You recognize reality, you don't like it, and then you're going to boycott it. You're going to go off on your own. You're going to be pissed off at the world. You don't like the way reality is. So you're going to lock yourself in a cave and just, holler, scream, complain. And, if that's what you choose to do, that's your choice. But, a lifelong protest against reality isn't going to improve your lot in life. You're just gonna die alone and miserable.
That just sounds very nice.
You know what I think would have helped because I think a lot of people took the Matrix, the visual feeling of it literally, where the real world was this grey thing living in caves and avoiding the machine. And people took that, oh, well, this is the real world, rather than if they made the real world as colorful and as interesting, but very different from the Matrix. I think that would have helped a lot of people who are very simple-minded and took it very literally from a visual point of view. Because their idea is like, oh, Neo, he dresses in shitty clothes, he lives in caves, and he's running away and hiding from everything. That's the real world. So therefore, I'm smart, I live in the real world.
To follow up on that, Human, it's been a long time since I've seen that movie, but wasn't the the reality of existence pretty dystopian in that movie?
Yeah.
And that's a message I think that kind of sticks in a lot of people's minds who don't give it any, thought on their own. The reality is that, this is a dystopian existence.
And a lot of people have quite rightly said, why wouldn't you agree with Cypher? If that's what reality is, why wouldn't you go back and eat steak? And I think a lot of people do that in a really sort of naive way, rather than saying, no, you know what? I want to eat steak in the real world. I want to get out of the dungeons. If I have to be awake, I don't want to go in the Matrix and be controlled by a lot of BS. But, is there a way I can add a bit of color and make it more enjoyable than living in a cave and being as dystopian as I think it is?
Yeah, that seems like what the sensible man would do. accept reality for what it is and then figure out how to improve your life. Avoid the fantasies, avoid, deceiving yourself and getting yourself into bad situations, but also recognize that it's up to you to better your lot in life.
Well, in a small way, I don't think people didn't give it as much credence in the movie, where they thought, well, in the Matrix, I can jump buildings, I can do kung fu, I can dodge bullets and all this stuff. But then by the end, like, Neo was starting to do some of that stuff in his boring, dreary, post-apocalyptic real world. And that just doesn't look as exciting. Visually, it's not as fun. And everyone likes the theme park world of the Matrix. And so without knowing it, I think people are just more attracted to the Matrix because they find that the real world is this ultra stoic, boring, cold, grumpy old man of hiding in caves and avoiding the government. And the Matrix is a fun world with a woman in a red dress.
Yeah. Yep.